Join TBS for an incredible look at America's lifelong obsession with the automobile. Driving Passion, America's love affair with the car. Premiering 8:05 Eastern tonight, exclusively on TBS.
The following is a TBS original.
It started almost 100 years ago at 90 miles an hour. The beginning of America's love affair with the car. It was about speed and a rich man's dream. Fiercely competitive and willing to risk his life, handsome, dark-haired Willie K. Vanderbilt set out to be the fastest man on Earth.
Willie K. was easily the most ardent automobilist of the turn of the century. Had he not been so enormously wealthy, I'm sure he would have been a mechanic, because he loved machinery, and he certainly knew more about machinery than most of the rich who had cars.
When Vanderbilt began his love affair, only the rich could afford these newfangled machines. Most didn't care how they worked. They simply collected them like toys, and could well afford to. It was an era of incredible wealth. Vanderbilt was the son of the richest man in America. Although he never worked a day in his life, he could tune his own engines, change his own tires. His love of cars had begun in childhood with a ride on a steam-powered tricycle. At 22, he bought a Phoenix Daimler that set him back $10,000. Then there was the car that terrified every pedestrian in New York. The Mercedes racer he named the Red Devil.
Vanderbilt scandalized upper-class New York with his adventures in automobiles, frequent accidents, races in city streets, drunken escapades with young ladies in the back of the car.
He just wanted to drive and to race and to challenge anything that was challengeable.
Once he even took on his own railroad, the New York Central. Driving 60 miles an hour, he ran neck and neck with the train from Newport to Boston. He would have won if he hadn't been stopped for speeding. In 1904, at Ormond Beach, Florida, driving a Mercedes, he set a new land speed record of 92 miles per hour, proving once and for all that Willie K. Vanderbilt was the fastest man on Earth.
Interestingly, the man he beat was someone who very much wanted to win, not like Willie K. for the sport of it, but for its commercial aspects, because he was determined to become an automobile manufacturer. That man's name was Henry Ford.
While Vanderbilt was breaking records in foreign-built cars, the typical American car was just a buggy with a motor strapped on it. Vanderbilt set out to change all that.
The big, powerful, sophisticated cars were being made in Europe, not in this country. And Willie K. wanted to do something about this. So he inaugurated the first serious international motor contest in this country.
With typical modesty, he called the race the Vanderbilt Cup. The first prize, a trophy designed by Tiffany's, and $20,000 cash. The 300-mile race was held on Long Island, just outside New York City.
The spectacle is one of speed, power, and wealth, often attracting crowds estimated as large as 350,000, 400,000. They were probably the largest audiences ever attracted for an American sporting event.
It was a spectacular event. Nobody in this country had seen the likes of sophisticated automobile racers who came from overseas to do it. So they stormed onto the track just to get a better look at the racers. They didn't realize how dangerous it could be. Willie Kay had to call off the race because he was afraid another of the cars coming toward the finish line might hurt somebody.
Every year, the crowds grew larger and more rowdy. The race became a day for hard drinking and hard driving, and claimed more than its share of casualties. A Vanderbilt Cup racer was a raw machine. Overpowered and underbraked, it was an accident waiting to happen. The cars rode so rough that drivers were beaten black and blue and lost 7 to 8 pounds in the course of one race. Cutthroat, they thought nothing of throwing wrenches or a handful of bolts to slow down the competition. In 1908, after 3 years of racing, the American car finally came into its own. George Robertson beat all comers in a locomobile made in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Willie Kay had proved the American automobile the equal of any in the world. The results, he said, far surpassed anything I had anticipated.
Willie Kay planted the seeds of the automobile in this country, not only by introducing the very rich to the automobile, but introducing it to the larger populace as well.
America was now ready to give the Europeans a run for their money. Maxwell, Rambler, Pierce Arrow, Locomobile, and Packard all beefed up their engines to compete. Every mechanic who ever tinkered with an engine seemed to be going into the car business. Along with Henry Ford, there were the Dodge brothers, Louis Chevrolet, and Henry Leland of Cadillac. In the next 15 years, over 3,000 people would try automobile manufacturing. And across America, it seemed like every small town had someone crazy about cars. Even a farming community like Oregon, Illinois. Here, E.D. Etnier decided to get into the business of making cars. His grandson, Joby Etnier, remembers.
Well, starting in 1907, Grandfather built 3 of the horseless carriages. And then they built a dozen of what was known as a touring car. These old Etniers had a 4th gear in them. You had to be going at least 45 miles an hour to get into 4th gear, and I don't know where they found the roads to do that. Of course, they wore the goggles, the dusters, because there were no paved roads. They were fast.
As a small town, Oregon's life was much like many of the other small towns in the U.S. When the auto arrived, of course, the streets were already being used by horses and buggies. Along comes this contraption with a motor, trying to occupy the same space on the streets. You can probably imagine that there were some difficulties.
Farmer Marvin Jacobs remembers his family's first encounters with these devil wagons.
When the automobile first came, I think it caused more problems because of the runaway of the horses. Noise of the cars was something new to the farmers as well as the townspeople. Of course, horses was in the majority, so they had the most laws in favor of the horse rather than the auto.
There really were some bizarre laws. One of them, for instance, required that there be a horseman preceding the vehicle and that he carry a Roman candle. And he, in a sense, was the warning of the forthcoming vehicle.
One of my favorites was if an automobile scared the horse and carriage. The automobilist had to dismantle the automobile, put all of its parts alongside the road, and allow the horse and carriage to pass, and then he could put his car back together again.
The car was slow to catch on with country folk, who still preferred their horsepower on the hoof. There were laws against driving on the Sabbath, laws against using a car in a funeral procession, laws against motoring into town without phoning ahead.